It's lovely to be here. Vikki, you and I spoke in April when thoughts of COVID-19 seemed to be crowding out most other thoughts, and it was a huge challenge to be upbeat. You told me we have to use all our internal resources, but also to use this as an opportunity to connect to people and to grow. How do you think people have been dealing with the crisis so far?
You know, it's funny how in the past few months, time has sort of telescoped. It feels like April was maybe 5 years ago. I mean, it feels like such a long time ago. And when tonight in preparation for this, I read the blog that I had posted that I had sent to you, Susan. And I was marveling about the fact that, you know, people were getting their groceries delivered, or things that just seemed so remarkable back then that now we're like, ho hum, oh yeah, we did, been there, done that. But, you know, so there's been this tremendous evolution from the initial trauma in March, at the end of February and in March, when we started to twig to the fact that this is big and something is going on, to this point where we're getting into a phase which sort of represents a saying that I've used throughout my life, which is what's extraordinary becomes ordinary. So now we're used to getting our groceries delivered. And so throughout this whole period of transition, I mean, definitely what we've seen has been the initial, actually, I think it's sort of a global trauma, because people everywhere have developed fear, and fear of contamination, fear of the unknown, fear of terrible illness and death, and fear of other people. So those people who don't already suffer from anxiety probably do now, because that's sort of the normal state of affairs. You know, the fact is that we have this tremendous uncertainty that, and even the people that we've depended on, you know, the doctors and the people in the news who were supposed to guide us, are making it up as they go along, as each new piece of information comes in. So I think emotionally and psychologically, the whole society is experiencing this state of transition, this state of fear, and in some ways chaos, where you don't know, can I do this or can I not do this? Can I go to the pharmacy, or is it not safe to go to the pharmacy? You know, should I stay home? You know, and the simple things that we would do without thinking, we now have to evaluate every move. So there, you know, I've said, you know, several times over the course of the past few months that we don't even begin to know the level of stress that we're under, and how it's affecting us, and how it's challenging us to face whatever each person's individual issue is. It's now front and center, and we have to grapple with ourselves, with our emotions, with our disappointment, with our fear, with our anxiety. And, you know, really the topic of today's talk, in the time of coronavirus, is there some good? Really, I think that I'm going to expand it to be, in the face of any trauma or any crisis, how do we make a little shift in our thinking so that we can use any crisis as a springboard for change?
Okay. Talk to me a bit about the typical, so then we'll broaden the discussion of COVID and the coronavirus to any serious crisis. Talk to me about, in your experience, the typical ways in which most people deal with a serious crisis.
You know, we live our lives aiming for peace, happiness, and maybe perfection. And so I think most people are unprepared for crisis because we don't expect it. particularly if you're blessed enough to live a life where you're not facing trauma, you're not facing, struggles with health or finances, or food security, or the things that so many people in the world are facing. If you're blessed to live, a safer kind of existence, in some ways we might be unprepared to deal with a crisis of this magnitude. And so we don't have the skills. So that people, I think that by and large, people are scrambling to be able to figure out how do I deal with this, and how do I deal with myself and my emotions and my disappointment and my frustration. The world is even more frustrating now. When we do get to the grocery store, we then have to stand online for 15 minutes just to get in the front door. The things that we took for granted are more frustrating. So people are dealing with this frustration. And I think that at this point, a friend of mine said, I'm sick of coronavirus. She said, I'm not sick with coronavirus, but I'm sick of coronavirus. And I think that at this point, like 3-4 months out, that a lot of people are starting to feel like, okay, enough with coronavirus. This is enough. This crisis has gone on long enough. And they're yearning to get out and feel that sense of normalcy, even if they know that it might be a bit risky. So I think that the frustration level is rising, and people are sort of now minimizing the risks in their own mind because maybe they don't know people who have been ill or acutely ill with the virus. And so it's starting to feel a bit remote. But I think that, that by and large, it's that sense of frustration that we're being held back from doing the things, the normal things that we want to be able to do on a daily basis.
So what can we be doing as a response?
Yeah.
Is it about sort of pivoting our response to the crisis?
Yeah, and I love that word, pivot. That's the thing, we have to pivot. And I think pivoting, Susan, that's a great word, and that's the way we should go. Because I think what we need to do is look below what's happening to the hidden gift of this extraordinary period of time. I mean, we all know the ways in which people have tried to connect with each other. So many people are feeling lonely and isolated. But the hidden gift is, it's a blessing and a curse. The curse is that we have to deal with our own issues. We have to face our own issues. If it's loneliness, we have to face the loneliness. If it's frustration, we have to face the frustration. If we're fighting with our spouse and there already was tension there and now it's worse, we have to face that. So that's the curse. But the blessing is that we have to face our own frustration, and we have to deal with the issues in our marriage, for example, and we have to deal with our own frustration. When life is calm and things are just going along normally, it's typically not a period of change. Most people change, and transitions in the really profound changes that take place in people's lives tend to take place as a result of a crisis. So, I mean, you may have heard, and I've certainly heard people who have had cancer who said, I never would have wanted cancer, but it taught me so much. I was forced, kicking and screaming, to change my diet, to slow down, to take care of myself. It forces you, crises force us to deal with things, and they force us to reach down inside and pull up some characteristics that we're going to have to use to face this period of time.
You are a great admirer of a book by an author named Ryan Holiday called The Obstacle is the Way. I've heard you speak about it. Why don't you tell our listeners a little about it?
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the premise behind this little book by Ryan Holiday. He's studied the Stoics and Marcus Aurelius. And he wrote this book, and I'm just going to read this. One of the things that he wrote in the book is, we don't control what happens to us, but we do control how we respond to what happens to us. So according to his philosophy, nothing is inherently good or bad in most things that happen to us, but it's the question of how we can mine that event to help us grow. So, for example, in this period of time, we might be just wishing it were over, but instead, if we slow down and we say, what can we do differently? And how can we use this extraordinary life that we're living at the moment to access integrity, patience, resourcefulness, all of these different qualities, pardon me, that will be necessary to get us through this in the long run. So his theory is that anything can be useful. Anything that happens to us can be useful. And that we can, if we do that little shift, and I suppose that's the little shift in thinking, because typically when something bad happens, we feel like, no, I don't want this, make it go away. I want it to be over. I can't take this. I can't take it anymore. And that uses a lot of emotional energy. That feeling that we're trying to escape from something, and that we're hoping with all of our hearts, hope, that this is going to be over with soon. And that how much longer is this going to go on? And when are the numbers going to start going down? And all of that emotional energy that we're using to sort of deny what's happening and to wish it away is very exhausting. I mean, I think I'm exhausted. I think everybody's exhausted. We're all exhausted. And it's partly being exhausted because of all of the thinking that we have to do. But I think it's also that mindset that this is bad and we want this to be over. And when is this going to be over? And when is the vaccine going to come out? And how many more months? And, when can I travel again? And when can I go visit my mother in Toledo, Ohio, or whatever it is? And, that sense of yearning for something and waiting and wishing for something takes a lot of emotional energy. So I think that the flip side of that is something that is called radical acceptance. And when you start thinking about radical acceptance, you can start to relax. If you can say, rather than, when is this going to be over? If you can say, sometimes I say I'm a therapist, right? So I say to my clients, just cut off the when at the beginning of the sentence. People say, why did he do this? I'll say, just cut off the why, and he did this. When is this going to be over? Cut off the when. It's going to be over. So that instead of yearning, if we can accept what we have with patience and grace, and recognize that 5 years from now, we're going to look back and say, did you believe 2020? That was a ride. That was a roller coaster. Oh my God, where were you? What happened to you? And we're all going to have this badge of honor that we lived through it and we survived it. So it's this idea, and maybe it's sort of like a Zen idea of what makes people unhappy, what causes the most pain in people's lives are expectations. You're waiting and hoping, oh, it didn't happen. Oh, you're hoping for something else. Oh, that didn't happen either. Oh my goodness, well that happened, but I hope it stays. It's this constant cycling through expectations that keeps people so very unhappy. And if we can really, it's a very simple idea, but it's really very profound and complex, which is just to live in the present moment, then hard to do. And then your anxiety can go down. And you can say, bring it on. You know, whatever life wants to give me, I'm happy to accept it.
It's also about using the obstacles in order to strengthen our own internal mechanisms to help us function in a stronger way. You've talked also about Alice Sommer and what you've learned from her.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Alice Sommer, she died maybe 4 or 5 years ago. She was at 110 when she was alive. She was the oldest living Holocaust survivor. And I give, you know, as Trudis so kindly read my CV, I give retreats every year in Sedona, Arizona. And at the end of the retreat, I always show the movie about Alice Sommer called The Lady in Number 6. So if people haven't watched it, if you can get it somewhere, you have to watch it. It's a little 36-minute documentary. And in this story, you hear about her life and how she grew up in Vienna, and she was a concert pianist, and she was having a wonderful life and a wonderful career, married to a violinist, I think he was, yeah, and they had a child. And then they're in Vienna, you know, in the 30s, and the Holocaust hit. And she was taken to Treblinka concentration camp, where a lot of musicians and artists were sent as sort of a demonstration of how well the inmates were treated. And the story about Alice Sommer is, you know, I feel like if you watch that 36-minute video, you're going to learn everything there is to learn about life. Because people said about her that she would play the piano and lift everybody's spirits. And throughout her life, even though she had lost her husband and her whole family in the concentration camp, she survived with her son. And throughout her life, she was always laughing, always happy. And one of the quotes from the movie, which I have taped to my computer, is, "Even the bad is beautiful if you know where to look for it." So that was her philosophy. And she lived it out, because in the movie, she talks about when her son was 67 years old, and she must have been 90 something or whatever. And he wasn't feeling well one day on a Tuesday. And he had a career as a cellist. He was an internationally known cellist, and he was also living a wonderful life. So he wasn't feeling well on a Tuesday. He went to the hospital on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday, something was terribly wrong and he died. So here this woman had survived the Holocaust. She had this one son, this precious son of hers. And when she tells the story about his death, what does she say? She says, "I thank God every day that he didn't suffer." She said, if he had to die, I'm so happy that he didn't spend a year in suffering. He went on a Tuesday and he died on a Wednesday. He had only one day in the hospital. And she managed to find something out of this terrible tragedy that she could hang on to and feel that there was a value in that. And when she talks about the passing of her son, that's the story that she tells. So that's this kind of woman who has this indefeatable spirit, you know, that she was going to find something of value out of a tragedy that, of course, you know, must have hurt her so profoundly.
Oh, of course. I seem to remember you and I discussed the film, and I think I found it, if I'm not mistaken, simply by Googling her name and the title of the film, which you said, say it again, it was something like The Woman in Number 6?
Number 6. The Lady in Number 6.
The Lady in Number 6. I think it's easy enough to find.
Yeah.
She sounds amazing, and you sound amazing recounting these incredible people.
About the film is that one of the other women who was in the concentration camp with her came to visit her every Sunday or something like that. And they interviewed this woman. And this woman said, you know, that at the end of the war, she was left for dead. People thought she was in this room with everyone who had died, and they thought she was dead. And she didn't die, she survived. And she said, when you've experienced such terrible things, you learn that there are very few things in life that have meaning, that have value. And those things are life itself and relationships. And she said, everything else you can do without. So what I learned from her was to be able to value life itself. We take our lives for granted, but just, you know, the tremendous value of getting up in the morning, even if you feel crummy, and saying, okay, good, I got up today, I'm still alive. And then whatever relationships we have, you know, how precious they are, and how so often we're striving for something else when it doesn't take all that much to be able to love life.
That this is indeed as good as it gets. I just want to ask you one final question, and then we'll see if people have questions for you. We mentioned the word pivot earlier. Leave us with just some advice about how we can change our focus so that we remember what you're talking about, so that we remember that perspective, so that we don't lose sight of it, so that we understand what there is really to be appreciative of and grateful for.
You know, when I'm in my office, I'm not in my office at this moment, I mean, these days because of the virus, but when I'm in my office, I have in my desk drawer a bunch of blue rubber bands. Like this, a rubber band, but blue. And so I might, if somebody said to me, how will I remember? I'd give them a blue rubber band and I'd say, put it around your wrist. And every time you hear yourself complaining, oh, this is so bad, my life is so bad, how come I don't have this, how come I don't have that? Snap your rubber band. And remember that that's not the person you want to be. And you're never going to be happy that way. That the way to be happy is to snap your rubber band. When you hear it, you have to monitor your own thinking, monitor your own self-talk, and become aware of when you are saying things that go against joy, that go against loving life, that go against appreciating how valuable our lives are and how lucky we are in spite of all the hard things that so many of us are facing. Because life is not easy, but it still can be beautiful.
That's beautiful. I think that's a beautiful note for us to wind up on.